Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. And this video is going to be my June 2021 reading wrap up. I know it's late, I apologise, but I read rather a number of books in June. I was still having a very good reading month. Not so great for July, but you'll find that out in my July wrap up. And so yeah, it was just a lot to film, and I've also been away. So I'm bringing it to you now, mainly because of the fact that I didn't want to combine 2 months, because that would be a crazy long video and probably not very much fun for you guys to watch. So again, I'm going to split this into categories and then order each of the categories from the book I like the least to the book I like the most. So I only had one DNF this month, and that was Username Evie, a graphic novel by Joe Sug, or Sug, I think. Now this one, the art style I did like. I can recognise it's very good, although it's not the sort of art style that I normally go for. It was very comic book style. I tend to go for a bit of a cutesier art style. It just wasn't holding my attention. I got it from a charity shop very soon before I read it, I think, actually. And the reason why I got it is because I'd bought book 3 in the series a couple of probably years ago now, because they don't put it on the spine of the book, or they didn't put it on the spine of the book cover which number in the series it was, so I thought it was the first one. It was not. And I wanted to buy the first book so I could try it out, and I didn't like it, and I unhauled both of those are gone, so that was my only DNF this month, which is pretty good. So the next sort of section of this wrap up is comic collections. So this is where it's more of a collection of an artist's artwork or panels or single page comic strips than a actual linear storyline. And all 3 of the ones I read this month were Cyanide and Happiness. We've got Punching Zoo, Stab Factory, and A Guide to Parenting by 3 Guys with No Kids. And I really like their humour. It's not the sort of thing I could read all the time, but occasionally I do find it very funny, and I really enjoyed all of these and gave these all 4 stars. If you like really if you like really crude humour, pick these up, give them a try. I'm pretty sure you can find like most of their stuff already online. Normally when they create one of their actual published in physical books, they'll have like some exclusive content at the end, but most of it you can just find online if you're interested. The next section is comics that do have a linear storyline. So the one I like the least is going to be Everyone's an Alieben When You're an Alieben Too. I mean, a lot of people seem to really rave about this book, and it does have a cute message. It has a very basic art style, but didn't really do anything for me. Maybe if I read it as a teenager it would have meant more. It does look like a baby's book, I will acknowledge that, but it is aimed at teens. But yeah, I didn't really gain anything from it, which is not a surprise because it's been a long time since I was a teenager. But yeah, I was sad that I didn't really like it, but I did read other things that I really loved this month. Speaking of that, the next one up was something I gave 4 stars. I gave Everyone's an Alieben 3 stars. And the one that I gave 4 stars was Under the Oak Tree. Now this is one of those comics that started becoming quite popular on apps, where you literally just scroll along to see the entire chapter. It's not really split up into pages, and so I got a subscription to one of these because I kept on seeing Under the Oak Tree advertised on YouTube, and I was just really curious, and I'm really enjoying it. I have marked it as read on Goodreads because the comic isn't actually all out yet, but I have read everything that is out, and I will just read chapters as they come out. So I would say that I'm worried there's going to be start to be a love triangle forming. I'm really sick of love triangles. I really hope that doesn't happen, and I really love the fact that the main character is substantially flawed. I think in a lot of comics you can have your main character be like a Mary Sue, have absolutely everything going for them. They are kind, intelligent, humble, and perfect, and then the author's like, oh, to make them relatable, I will give them this flaw. They are insecure about their nose shape, even though they're beautiful. And it's so stupid, whereas in this book, she has a marked speech impediment, which she does get bullied for, and she has to work to not overcome it in terms of being cured of the speech impediment. I really hope that doesn't happen in this book, because I think that would be in pretty poor taste. But in terms of learning how to deal with it and learning how to be a leader with this speech impediment, I think is a really interesting aspect of the story. The only... Oh, I have one glaring problem with it though, and that is that the main love interest is remarkably possessive. It's very much... I think that the author is sort of making a commentary on men's opinion of women and ownership in the like medieval times, because it is a medieval inspired fantasy, but sometimes it can toe the line. I think that ultimately I recognise it and I don't like that it's there, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the story. I think that one thing where I think it does go a bit too far is its discussion on consent and withdrawal of consent. So I think if that's something that really bothers you, do not pick this up. But it's something I recognise and I don't like, but I do still very much enjoy the story and the artwork, and I look forward to when more chapters are going to come out. And the last comic that not the last comic I read, but the comic that I gave 5 stars to this month, which probably isn't going to be of any surprise to anyone if you've spent more than 2 minutes watching Booktube, but that is Mooncakes. And this was just delightful. I think the art style was stunning. I really want to get a physical copy because I read it online, and it's about a witch from a family of witches and a non-binary werewolf, and these two used to be really, really good friends when they were kids, and they meet up again when they are sort of in their late teens, I think the characters were, and they are working to battle this demon in the woods. And it's got werewolves and witches and magic, and it's so brilliantly diverse and discusses some really important topics while also just being a really lovely story. So if you've got any inclination to reading this, if you love fantasy graphic novels that sort of aren't all just cutesy nonsense but really pack an emotional punch, I would really recommend this one. It was lovely, and if they're making any more, I will definitely be picking them up. So the last category is novels that I read, and I read quite a few. The one I liked the least was And the Ocean Was Our Sky by Patrick Ness. I've had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with Patrick Ness's writing. Some of his books I absolutely adore, and then some of the more recent ones have been a bit of a flop, I'm really scared to say. And this one, I just finished it and I was like, what the hell was that? What was it? What did I just read? I think it was meant to be a commentary on the atrocities of war, that both sides of a war commit atrocities, and a sort of a warning about the dangers of environmental change and environmental destruction, which are all good things in my opinion. Not the environmental destruction, the sort of talking about it and making commentary on it and making people aware. But the actual plotline, it was just so weird. I mean, I loved the writing. I always love Patrick Ness's writing, which is pretty much what kept me engaged and kept me reading, but it was so odd. So we are essentially following a pod of whales as they are going hunting for people. It's progressed so far into the future that whales are hunting people, but if you imagine like the boat is up here and the whales are down here, the whole perspective is flipped. So they are diving down to our surface, and that's like the bottom of the world for them. And so everything is flipped. So it's constantly like if they dive up, they're getting more pressurized, and that's their sort of sky. And but also they've progressed so much that they have learnt to enslave other sea creatures, make weaponry, fire weaponry, and build boats. and they kind of like, they were harvesting human limbs. It was such a weird book, and at parts very, very disgusting. Like, if you do not like gore, do not read this. I'm hoping that I've put the book on the screen, but like, the blood rushing down on the cover, like, that is accurate to what is happening in the book. It was just so weird, and I gave it a 3. I'm honestly thinking of dropping it down to a 2, just because I really didn't like it. Thankfully, the rest of the stuff I read this month was really good, so let's move into that. So most of the other books I'm going to be talking to you about are pretty much all 4 stars, so they're really in no particular order. So the first one I'm going to mention, or the first 5, should I say, that I'm going to mention are, I basically binged the entire Percy Jackson series, excluding the short story collection and the 2 books about Greek mythology from Percy Jackson's perspectives and all the sort of spin-off bits. But the core Percy Jackson books, I reread the first 4, and I read for the first time the last one. So we have Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, Percy Jackson and the Sin of Monsters, Titan's Curse, Battle of the Labyrinth, and The Last Olympian. And I think these hold up remarkably well as a series, although I know that diversity-wise, I've been told that Rick Riordan does get better as the series progresses. But I would still highly recommend these to young people today. At no point does Percy talk down to the reader, and I think that he's a really fun main character. He also ages and grows a lot as a person by the end of the series, because pretty much every book happens a year apart, pretty much. And I think that The Last Olympian, which is the only sort of new one that I read, was a really solid conclusion to the story. Every book has its own plot line, but there is sort of an overarching plot line happening throughout the entire thing, which does come to a head in... Nearly dropped the books. You should have seen that. Which does come to a big head in that final novel, which I think was really skillfully executed. I think that it's been leading up to this big battle scene, and enough of the book was covering the battle to make it sort of, not worth it's not the right word, make it sort of high stakes enough that, you know, the main characters had to fight to survive, essentially, and you felt the stakes at this point, but also that it wasn't so much of the book that it got boring and repetitive. I think my only sort of downside to these, I mean, I did give them these all 4, not 5 stars, mainly just because of the fact that I have grown out of them. I would still say they hold up as a reread. They were very nostalgic, but I am looking forward to reading Rick Riordan's next books, because I've heard that as the characters get older in those books, they're sort of geared towards a slightly older audience, which I'm pretty sure is still like teenagers, but like, I think that most people acknowledge that, like, everyone loves Rick Riordan. Everyone calls him Uncle Rick on Twitter. He's just an amazing person in general. The only downside that I did have to this series was that it was a little bit, how to put this, there were a couple of insults where the main characters were calling some of the monsters fat and ugly and sort of using those as synonymous. I hope that's something that he sort of sorts out, and it was only like once or twice throughout the entire series, but I mean, these are quite old. I think that I can forgive Uncle Rick for that. So I finished this. I basically binged them back to back. I really enjoyed them, and have I even told you what these are about? No. So, to cover this, although most of you have probably heard of these already, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, being the first book, is about a boy called Percy who discovers that he is a demigod and that his father is one of the old Greek gods who are alive and kicking, as the front cover says, and he gets swept up into this world of monsters and battles and fighting, and I think it's very well balanced between battles and fighting and also serious situations, and like there's a romance plot line, there's multiple sort of overarching storylines, and Percy really does grow as a character. Not unrealistically so, but I think that this is very, very good. I think when the last book was coming out though, this is one other thing I've just remembered that I didn't like. Near the very end of the series, I won't spoil which characters, but they try and just like push in a love triangle. I think it was just because of the times that it was written and the fact that love triangles were all the rage. So it felt shoved in there. It was not believable in any way. There was practically no chemistry, and I liked the way that sorted itself out, but it felt thrown in there and it didn't fit and it was detracting and I didn't like it. But I would still highly recommend these books. And the next book I read, or the next book on this list, is How to Give Up Plastic. I can't remember if I read this the month before and whether or not I included it in that video, mainly just because of the fact that a lot of the videos have now been filmed up out of order, so I could just be getting confused. Sorry about the seagulls, by the way. I am so warm in here and I don't want to put the fan on because that would be more annoying, and I've got the window open. So How to Give Up Plastic is very good, I think, once you hit the informative sections. I think the first sort of lead up bit it's by someone at Greenpeace, and it just feels like Greenpeace is so amazing, blah blah blah, look at all the good work that we've done, look at what Greenpeace are doing now, and which is great. But like, if I wanted a book about how to give up plastic, I could have easily gone to Google and typed in Greenpeace and look at what they do and the work that they do and the work they put in. They could have easily put the website in the book, which I think they probably did. I don't have a copy to hold now because I've already passed it on to a friend. Books like that, I think I'd like to see do more good than just me reading it. So I would recommend, if you are sort of trying to figure out how you can sort of phase out plastic from your everyday life, but I would just start it from halfway through. So semi-recommend. So the next book that I read was What's the Tea, which I do own, but it's up on my top shelf and I can't be bothered to go get my ladder to get it off the shelf. So What's the Tea is a book by Juno Dawson, and she wrote another book a number of years ago now called This Book is Gay, and it's sort of like a handbook for being an LGBT person. And I think that it was one of the first LGBT books I ever read, and I found it really, really helpful. But as the world has progressed, I think that some of the stuff in there has now become quite outdated. Juno herself agrees. So with What's the Tea, I found it much more open, and even though I do think that it would still be useful for people who aren't trans or gender non-conforming, because of the fact that it really gives you insight to be able to sympathise with people who don't have the same experiences as you. So if you are trans or not, I think that this would be a really interesting resource. The next book I read was a book called Queerly Autistic, and this is a book that I had no idea about, but I saw it on Scribd and I fancied something to listen to. It was relatively short, so I just decided to pick it up and give it a go. And it's not the sort of book that I would need now, but as a young person, I think this would have been it would have been a fantastic resource to me as a young person, as someone who's both autistic and LGBT. I think that a lot of resources that people point you to when you are LGBT don't, not focus, but like, it's very difficult to find something that is then geared to people who are then intersecting on other aspects of humanity, I guess. And I think that, again, I do recommend this sort of thing for both autistic and non-autistic and LGBT and straight people. I think that this would be a good resource. However, I think that if you are reading it as a straight person or as a non-autistic person, it is going to feel very repetitive. A lot of the stuff was lifted from one section to another because of the fact that it's not really a book that you're supposed to read from cover to cover. It's written in a way that the author assumes that you are going to look up in the contents page the identities that you are thinking about, that you want to know more about, want to know what they mean, want to know if they fit you, and then flipping to those specific points. And I think that it really lays out in detail something that is very, very abstract to a lot of people. Something that I really struggled with growing up was identifying emotions. And I think identifying romantic emotions can be quite difficult for a lot of autistic people. And I hate the fact that some people assume that autistic people are incapable of love and also incapable of like having happy, stable, fair relationships, which I think is a gross misconception. So I think that this was a very good book. Not horrendously helpful to me at this age, but I would recommend for anyone that you know that is on the spectrum and also trying to figure themselves out. I swear we're nearly done, guys. So the last 4-star that I read this month was... I literally just looked at the piece of paper. What am I doing? Silver in the Wood. It's such a short book, but it was so delightful. It was a beautifully crafted, I would almost say whimsical fairy tale, or folk tale. It essentially follows a man who lives in and cares for the wood as the environment around him changes, as people take over areas of the wood. He's the guardian, as I would say, of this wood, and the folk tale aspect sort of gets brought in with sort of the life of the wood and the life of the plants and the trees being sort of a more tangible thing. That's where the sort of fantasy element comes in, and a lot of the people in the surrounding towns basically think that he's a crazy wild man who lives in the woods and never brushes his hair, etc. And the story kicks off with him meeting a man called Silver, who has just acquired the land that this wood is covering, and it follows essentially their romance. I mean, these characters clearly have very tangible chemistry throughout the entire thing, but I wouldn't call this a romance story. There is romance in it, but it's not the main focus of the plot. And it was just really, really beautifully written. If you have any inclination towards fantasy or fairy tales, I would really give this a listen or a read. It's the sort of thing that you could probably finish in like less than a day. And on to the last 2 books, or technically 3 reads, because one of them I read twice this month. And I'll get that one over and done with because I have spoken about it a number of times this year now, and you're probably getting bored of hearing me speak about the same book, which is Eric by Terry Pratchett. Wait 1 second while I get my copy. This is easily my favourite sort of comfort read, and I happen to have the audiobook still in my car, and I took 2 pretty long journeys in the month of June, and so I just ended up listening to this twice this month. This book is about Rincewind, who's a wizard, and him trying to get back to Earth from being trapped somewhere from a previous book in the series. You don't have to read these in order technically. I read this without reading the previous one. And his sort of encounterings with a demon summoner. So this is fantastic, very, very funny, very, very clever, highly recommend, although I have talked about it a number of times, so I'll shut up about it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about this month, and probably my favourite of the month, okay, probably tied for Eric, but that one is sort of one of my favourite books of all time. And that was No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. Now, this was fantastic. It was essentially a collection of her speeches. So it wasn't really linear in terms of a storytelling way. I've read so much non-fiction this year, by the way. Normally I read very, very little non-fiction, and I've read quite a bit this year. By the end of the year, I'd be really interested to see, like, how my read genres play out, because normally I read like 1 non-fiction book a year. But this was absolutely phenomenal. I think that for being so young, she has such a fantastic grasp on the problems that our world is facing, and frankly the hate that she has got from adults is disgusting. The fact that she has been called an R word, and amongst several other things, mostly from people in government who want to stop her from going to conferences because of the fact that she's talking about real issues that people aren't putting enough effort into changing, and sort of saying, why isn't she in school? Personally, I think a lot of the people who are denying climate change, the school system clearly failed you. Sorry, that was condescending, but I can't say I didn't mean it. So, I would really highly recommend this. It was a very short read, but it is just fantastic. If you can find the audiobook of it, Greta herself narrates it, and I think that it really comes across with her passion with the narration, so I would highly recommend. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I read, not this month but the previous month. I'd love to hear about something you read recently, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!